On Christmas night, single mom risked her life for 25 bikers and 1,500 show up. He slammed the eviction notice against the diner door, his voice cold as the Denver wind. "You have 72 hours, Miss Miller." Behind the glass, Tasha clutched her wheezing son, her world collapsing in silence. Outside, the snow kept falling white, pure and merciless. Once, she was a chef in a glittering restaurant owned by a billionaire who said charity had no place in business. Now, she was begging the night to spare her child. In a world this cruel, what would you have done in her place? Welcome to Emotional Echoes, a channel where emotions come alive and every story leaves a lasting echo in your heart. Please subscribe to Emotional Echoes. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers so more souls can feel these stories. Stay with my video till the very end and let me know where you're watching from so I can see how far this story spreads. Now, let me tell you her story. Tasha Miller pressed her palms against her son's chest, counting every shallow breath like it might be his last. The heater had stopped hours ago, and the cold had crept into everything, into her bones, into her hope. Eli's lips were turning pale, and the sound of his coughing filled the empty diner. She pulled him closer, her arms trembling from exhaustion. She whispered to him softly, trying to sound brave, but her voice broke between words. "God, if you're out there, I'm begging you, don't take my baby too." Tasha had been fighting for so long that she no longer knew what peace felt like. Nights like this had a way of reminding her how small she was against the world. Her husband was gone, the bills kept coming, and even the walls of this place seemed to be closing in. The flickering light above the counter buzzed like it was mocking her. She reached up to tap it, but it went out completely. Darkness swallowed the diner, and only the sound of Eli's wheezing told her she wasn't alone. She searched for the flashlight, found it dead, then stumbled to the back to check the breaker. Her fingers were numb, her breath short. When she flipped the switch, a sharp crack and burst of sparks exploded from the box. She screamed and fell back, the flash blinding her for a moment. The silence after was worse, the kind that makes you hear your own heartbeat and realize how afraid you really are. She crawled back to Eli, wrapping him in her coat, her mind racing for what to do next. She had no money for a motel, no gas in the car, no one to call. Her voice trembled as she whispered to the sleeping boy, "We just need to make it till morning, baby. Just till morning." Outside, the wind howled like a warning. Snow slammed against the windows in heavy waves. She thought she heard something beyond the storm, a deep, distant sound that didn't belong. She froze, listening. It came again, louder this time, a low rumble, like thunder mixed with growling metal. Then she saw them, headlights cutting through the snow, one after another, lining up in front of the diner. She rose slowly, her pulse pounding in her ears. The lights shone straight into the glass, blinding her. She could make out dark shapes, men getting off motorcycles, heavy boots crunching the snow. Her breath caught when one of them stepped closer to the door and knocked hard enough to rattle it. "Ma'am," a rough voice shouted over the storm, "we're freezing out here. Please, we just need a place to stay alive tonight." Tasha's heart dropped into her stomach. Her hands clutched Eli's tiny body as she backed away from the window. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "Not tonight. Please, not this." Another knock came, louder. The handle rattled. She looked around for something to defend herself, a kitchen knife, a metal pan, anything. Her whole body shook. She could hear Eli stir, coughing weakly. "Lord, please don't make me open that door," she whispered again. Tears blurred her eyes. The pounding of the wind mixed with the steady rhythm of her fear. For a long moment, she stood there in the dark, caught between survival and faith, between terror and compassion. The sound of the engines outside roared again, echoing through the night, as if the storm itself had brought them to her door. And in that single heartbeat of silence that followed, Tasha realized she had no idea what waited for her on the other side. Tasha had never been afraid of hard work. For years, she ran the kitchen at one of Denver's most exclusive restaurants, the kind of place where one plate could pay her rent. She arrived before sunrise, left after midnight, and still found time to pack warm meals for the janitors working the graveyard shift. She didn't see it as charity. She saw it as decency. Her mother used to say, "If you got more than you need, you got more than enough to share." That belief ended the night Richard Hayes came down to her kitchen. He wasn't supposed to be there. Billionaires didn't walk through grease-stained floors, but his polished shoes echoed like judgment on tile. The staff froze when he appeared, tall, tailored, and perfectly still. His eyes scanned the room like a man counting floors, not people. Tasha stood frozen, holding a box of packed leftovers in her hands. He stopped in front of her and asked, calm and cold, "What exactly do you think you're doing?" She tried to explain that the food would be thrown away anyway, that the janitors hadn't eaten all day. Hayes tilted his head, the corner of his mouth curling. "Then maybe they should work harder. Feed them with your paycheck, not my leftovers." The words hit like a slap. She wanted to speak, but her throat closed. Around them, the kitchen went silent. Hayes reached into his coat, pulled out a small envelope, and dropped it on the counter. "You're done here, Miss Miller. I run a business, not a charity." Then he smirked, adjusted his cufflinks, and turned away, leaving the smell of his expensive cologne and the sound of humiliation hanging in the air. That night, she walked home under the falling snow, carrying the box of food she never got to give away. Her husband, Marcus, opened the door before she could even speak. He wrapped her in his arms, his voice soft and steady. "We'll be okay," he whispered. "We always are." He always said that even when the world proved him wrong. A week later, the scaffolding on Hayes's latest high-rise collapsed. Marcus never came home. The company called it an accident, but she knew better. Hayes built his towers with cheap steel and human lives. She stood at the site, staring at the twisted wreckage, the smell of burnt metal still fresh. Reporters came and went, but no one said his name. No one dared. No one from Hayes Corporation attended the funeral. The insurance claim was denied. Within months, the bank took their house. Every door she knocked on shut in her face. By the time she found work again, washing dishes in a rundown diner called Mama's Table, she'd already learned the truth. The world never punishes cruelty, it punishes kindness. The only thing she kept from her old life was her mother's recipe book, pages yellowed and stained with oil. When life turns cold, her mother used to say, feed someone. Kindness will warm you back. But kindness hadn't paid the bills. Kindness hadn't saved Marcus. Still, she carried that book everywhere, tucked close to her chest, like a prayer she wasn't ready to stop believing in. Back in the present, a knock shook her from her thoughts. Eli stirred in her arms, his breathing uneven. Outside, the wind howled, and the sound of engines echoed faintly through the storm. Then came another knock, sharper this time. She whispered to herself, voice trembling, "What if they're criminals? What if it's a trap?" Eli's small hand clutched her sleeve. "Mama, please let them in." His voice cracked, weak but certain. For a moment, she saw Marcus in his eyes, the same stubborn faith that refused to die. The snow beat against the window, and the knocking grew louder. Fear told her to stay silent, but her heart, fragile and human, whispered something else. Tasha stood frozen, staring at the door as the pounding grew harder. Each thud felt like it shook her chest. She could hear the wind slicing through the cracks and the sound of boots outside scraping against the snow. Eli whimpered softly, his fingers gripping her sleeve. She wanted to tell him everything would be fine, but the words refused to come. For a moment, she thought about her husband and what he would have done. Marcus would have opened the door. He always believed in people. She was not sure she still did. Her hand reached for the latch. Trembling, she whispered a short prayer she could barely hear herself say. Then she turned the handle. The door flew open, and the wind rushed in like a wave. Snow whipped against her face as blinding white light filled the diner. 25 men stood there, shoulders hunched, eyes squinting through the storm. Their leather jackets were crusted with ice, their breath visible in the freezing air. The one in front stepped forward, tall and broad, with a face marked by years of battles he didn't talk about. His name was Mike Cooper, though she didn't know that yet. He raised his hands slowly to show he meant no harm. Behind him, a young black man stumbled forward, clutching his thigh. The fabric was torn, and blood soaked through it, turning dark against the snow. Mike's voice cracked as he spoke. "Ma'am, please, we can sleep on the floor. We just need to get out of this cold." He pointed to the young man leaning on another biker. "He's bleeding bad. He won't make it if we stay out here." Tasha's fear sharpened. Her voice shook, but her eyes stayed firm. "If any of you try something, I swear I'll burn this place down with all of us inside." The men exchanged glances, quiet but respectful. Mike nodded slowly. "Fair enough, ma'am, but please, let us in. We're just trying to stay alive." Something in his voice caught her. It wasn't pity, it was truth, the kind that breaks through fear. She looked at Eli. His face was pale, but his eyes were steady. "Mama," he whispered, "they look like soldiers." Tasha swallowed hard and stepped back. "Fine, come in." The door opened wider, and the cold air rushed past her as the men moved inside one by one. Their boots thudded on the old floor, water dripping from their jackets. Mike helped the injured man to a booth near the window. Tasha could feel her pulse racing as she grabbed a towel from the counter and pressed it to the wound. Danny winced, his body shaking from the cold. "It's okay," she said quietly. "Stay still. You're safe now." He nodded weakly. The blood kept coming, but she worked fast, her hands sure despite her fear. Years in kitchens had taught her to stay calm when everything went wrong. Mike crouched beside her, watching silently. His breath was heavy, his eyes tired. "You've got courage, ma'am," he said. "That's rare these days." Tasha didn't look up. "No," she answered softly. "I've got nothing left to lose." The room went quiet except for the storm outside. For the first time that night, Tasha realized the fear hadn't left her. It had just changed its shape. She didn't know who these men were or what tomorrow would bring. But as she tied the last bandage, she knew one thing. For now, they were alive, and that was enough. For a while, no one spoke. The wind outside screamed against the windows, but inside, the diner was quiet except for the soft hum of Eli's breathing. Tasha sat close to her son, watching the strangers she had just let into her world. They stood awkwardly near the tables, unsure whether to sit or speak. Their faces looked rough, scarred by years that had taken more than they gave. She could still feel fear in her chest, but it was fading, replaced by something else. Maybe exhaustion, maybe the faint memory of trust. Mike was the first to move. He knelt beside the old furnace and began feeding it bits of wood from a broken chair. Within minutes, a small flame caught, glowing weakly. The other men followed his lead, clearing snow from their jackets, muttering about how long it had been since they'd felt real heat. The warmth spread slowly, crawling up the walls like a shy guest. Tasha looked at Mike and asked if he used to do this kind of thing. He smiled faintly. "Used to, ma'am. A long time ago, before life got messy." Eli peeked from behind his mother and pointed to the badge on Mike's torn vest. "Road Angels." The boy asked what it meant, his voice still hoarse. Mike said it used to mean something good, a brotherhood for soldiers who came home but never really made it back. We were Marines, Army, Navy, all of it. Then we lost too much and had nowhere to go. He hesitated, eyes distant. "I lost my little girl, cancer. After that, I figured God just stopped listening." The room went silent. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. Tasha didn't know what to say. She had her own anger at God, her own unanswered prayers. But she looked at Mike and whispered, "Maybe he didn't stop listening. Maybe we just stopped hearing." Mike stared at her for a moment, then gave a quiet nod. Danny, the young biker, tried to sit up. His voice was weak, but steady. "Why'd you let us in, ma'am? You didn't know if we were good men." Tasha looked down at her hands, the skin cracked from cold and soap. "Because once, someone opened their door for me when I had nothing left. I just remembered how that felt." Danny smiled faintly and said, "Guess you're one of us now." Eli laughed for the first time in days. It was a small, broken laugh, but it filled the room like light. Tasha caught herself smiling too. She stood, went behind the counter, and found a few ingredients that had survived the power outage. Flour, oil, a bag of chicken she'd saved for tomorrow. She said she could still make her mother's recipe, and if they were hungry, they could help. Mike grinned, standing to assist. "You cook, we'll clean." They worked together quietly. The sound of sizzling oil replaced the wind's howl. The smell of fried chicken filled the diner, rich and familiar. One of the men started humming a tune, and soon another joined in, off-key but honest. Eli clapped along, sitting close to the fire with a bowl of soup one of the bikers had heated up. Tasha turned the chicken carefully, her eyes softening. For a brief moment, she forgot the cold, the debts, and the fear waiting outside. In their place came laughter, faint and fragile, echoing through the small diner like a heartbeat returning to life. It happened just past midnight. The laughter had faded, replaced by the quiet hum of the fire and the steady rhythm of Eli's breathing. Most of the men had fallen asleep in their coats, scattered around the diner like soldiers after a long battle. Tasha was wiping the counter when she heard a sound that made her freeze. A low groan, deep and strained. She turned and saw Danny on the floor, his body shaking, his face drenched in sweat. Mike rushed to his side, his voice breaking as he called his name. Danny's skin burned under his touch. The others woke quickly, crowding around. Someone shouted that he was burning up. Another asked for a phone. But when they tried, the signal was gone. The storm had cut them off from the world. Panic spread like smoke. Mike looked at Tasha, desperate. "Do something, please." Tasha ran to the back, searching through drawers and cabinets for anything that could help. Her hands moved fast, but her heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. She found an old pot, filled it with snow, and set it near the fire to melt. Her mother's voice came back to her, soft and steady. "When medicine fails, warmth and faith will do the rest." She grabbed towels, dipped them in the warm water, and laid them across Danny's forehead, neck, and arms. The room fell silent. The fire crackled, and the wind howled outside. But inside, every sound was heavy. The men stood helpless, watching her move. She whispered to Danny to stay with her, to keep breathing. His chest rose unevenly, his breath short and harsh. Sweat poured down his temples, and his lips turned grey. Mike knelt beside him, gripping his hand like he could pull him back by force alone. Eli climbed off his chair and came closer, his small hands trembling. He looked at his mother, then at Danny. "Mama, is he gonna die?" Tasha's throat tightened. She couldn't answer. Instead, she took his hand and placed it over Danny's. "Pray, baby. Just pray." Eli bowed his head, whispering words that stumbled out between sobs. "God, please don't take anyone else. Please don't let him go." His voice cracked, and one of the bikers turned away to hide his tears. Hours passed. The towels cooled, and Tasha kept changing them, her movements slower each time. Her arms ached, her knees numb, but she didn't stop. The men tried to help, bringing more melted snow, holding the pot steady. Mike stayed beside Danny, talking to him quietly about roads they used to ride, about sunsets he still needed to see. "Hang in there, brother. You still got miles left." Tasha leaned close, wiping Danny's face, whispering, "Stay with me, soldier. You hear me? Stay." His body twitched, his breath shallow. For a moment, she thought it was over. She pressed her forehead against his hand and closed her eyes, her voice trembling. "Not again. Please, not again." Then, somewhere between the last echo of the wind and the first hint of dawn, Danny's hand moved. His fingers twitched, then gripped hers weakly. His lips parted, and a rough whisper escaped. "You saved me." Tasha lifted her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "No," she said softly. "You saved me from giving up." Mike exhaled, like he had been holding his breath all night. He covered his face with his hands, his voice shaking. "You're an angel, ma'am. Ain't no other word for it." Tasha shook her head. "I'm just a mother trying not to lose another child." The sun began to creep through the frosted window, casting pale gold light across the diner. The storm was dying, and for the first time in days, the world looked still. Danny's breathing evened out, slow but steady. The men slumped in relief, some crying openly, some praying under their breath. Eli climbed into his mother's lap, resting his head against her chest. Tasha held him close, watching the light grow stronger. The night had taken everything from them, but left one thing behind. A small, stubborn spark of life that refused to die. And as she sat there holding her son, she realized that maybe, just maybe, the storm had given her something too, a reason to keep fighting. The storm had passed, but peace didn't last long. 2 days after the bikers left, the growl of an engine outside the diner made Tasha's stomach twist. It wasn't the sound of motorcycles this time. It was the low hum of power, a black SUV with tinted windows rolling to a stop in front of Mama's table. She was wiping the counter when the door opened, and Richard Hayes stepped inside, followed by a man in a sharp suit, carrying a leather briefcase. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. Tasha froze. The last time she saw that face, it was standing over her with a pink slip and a sneer. Richard didn't waste words. "Miss Miller, this property has been purchased by Hayes Corporation. You have 72 hours to vacate." The words hit her like a slap. She blinked, confused. "What are you talking about? This diner isn't for sale." "It was foreclosed," he said flatly. "Your payments lapsed. We're redeveloping the block." He looked around the small diner like it was an eyesore. "Progress can't wait for sentiment." Her jaw trembled. "Progress? You call this progress taking food out of a child's mouth?" Richard exhaled through his nose, calm as ice. "You chose this, Miss Miller. People who plan ahead don't end up like this." The blood rushed to her face. Her hands gripped the counter so tightly her knuckles turned white. "You already took everything from me once. My job, my husband, my home. And now you want to take the roof over my son's head. What kind of man sleeps at night after that?" He adjusted his tie, avoiding her eyes. "A successful one." Something inside her snapped. Her voice cracked open, raw with fury. "You build skyscrapers, Mr. Hayes, but you can't build a soul. You think height means worth, but all I see when I look at those towers is blood on glass." For the first time, he flinched. His lawyer shifted uncomfortably beside him. "Miss Miller," Richard began, "you're being emotional. This is business." She stepped closer, her breath sharp and shaking. "Business? My husband died building your empire. He gave you everything and you repaid him with silence. You fired me for feeding the hungry, and now you're here to finish what's left." The sound of coughing cut through her rage. She turned. Eli was standing by the door, one hand clutching his chest, gasping for air. His small body shook as he tried to breathe. Tasha rushed to him, panic flooding her. "Baby, breathe. Come on, breathe for Mama." She dropped to her knees, fumbling for his inhaler, tears blurring her sight. Richard froze. The lawyer started to speak, but Richard raised a hand, his composure cracking for the first time. Eli's wheezing filled the diner. The sound was sharp, desperate, human. Richard's eyes darted between mother and son. For a moment, he looked like a man watching his own soul exposed in front of him. Tasha pressed the inhaler to Eli's lips, whispering, "Stay with me, baby." When the boy finally drew a full breath, her relief broke into sobs. She turned toward Richard, face wet with tears. "You see that? That's what your world does to people like us. You build towers that scrape the sky, but you crush hearts that live on the ground." Richard tried to speak, but nothing came out. She stood, holding Eli close, her voice low but fierce. "The world doesn't reward the strong, Mr. Hayes. It rewards the cruel. But storms don't care about money. And when yours comes, no building will save you." The silence that followed felt heavier than any blizzard. Richard's jaw tightened. He closed the briefcase himself this time, his knuckles pale against the handle. "You have until Friday," he said quietly. Tasha didn't move. "Keep your deadline," she said, her tone like steel. "Keep your money too. You can't buy back what you broke." He hesitated at the door, the wind pushing snow across the threshold. For the first time, he didn't look powerful. He looked small. Outside, The storm began to rise again, the wind howling through the cracks as if the world itself was answering for her. The SUV pulled away, its taillights fading into the snow. Inside, the diner stood quiet except for Eli's soft breathing and the faint creak of the sign swaying in the wind. Tasha sank to the floor, holding her son tight, her voice barely a whisper. "Let him build all the towers he wants. I'll build something he can never touch, a heart that still believes." The red notice on the door bled through the paper like a wound she couldn't close. "Vacate immediately." The words stared back at her in cruel silence. Tasha tore it down, but it didn't matter. The power had been cut, the pantry bare, and the air inside Mama's table felt like the breath had been sucked out of it. She packed what she could, a blanket, a pot, Eli's inhaler, and stepped out into the storm. The snow came harder now, blinding and sharp. Each gust felt like the world itself wanted her gone. Eli coughed weakly against her shoulder, his body light as a whisper, his breath coming in painful gasps. She tightened her coat around him and started knocking on doors. At the first house, a woman peeked through the curtain and shook her head before Tasha could speak. At the next, a man cracked the door open just far enough to let the warm air hit her face, then slammed it shut without a word. Every no felt colder than the snow. The wind howled through her clothes, and she could feel the sting of frost on her fingers. She tried again. "Please," she begged. "My boy's sick, just a little heat, just for the night." A man in a business suit sneered. "You people always got a story. Get a job, not sympathy." His door clicked shut like a final verdict. She moved from house to house, her legs shaking, her lips cracked and bleeding. The world blurred into white and grey. Doors kept closing, she thought, each one heavier than the last. Her tears froze on her face before they could fall. Eli's body suddenly went limp in her arms. "Eli!" she cried, falling to her knees. His little hand slipped from her coat, his lips pale. She shook him gently. "Wake up, baby. Please, don't you do this to me." Her voice cracked under the weight of desperation. People passed on the sidewalk, eyes down, pretending not to see. Cars slowed, then sped up again. For a moment, she hated them all. The quiet faces behind windows, the turned backs, the ones who still had light when hers had gone out. "God," she whispered, "why does kindness die first?" Her voice was barely a breath, lost in the wind. Then she heard another voice, firm, low, full of authority that could only come from love. "You put that child down and get yourself inside. Now." Tasha looked up through the snow. A woman stood across the street, wrapped in a brown coat and a faded scarf. Her grey hair framed a face, strong as stone, warm as firelight. She was maybe 70, with eyes that had seen too much to still be cruel. "You don't argue," the woman said. "You move." Tasha couldn't speak. Her legs barely obeyed. The woman was already crossing, boots crunching in the snow. She took Tasha by the arm and half dragged her across the street into a small house with yellow light spilling through the window. The warmth hit her like a shock. The room smelled of soup and clean laundry. The woman laid Eli on the couch, pulled off his wet coat, and wrapped him in blankets. She pressed a hand to his forehead. "Fever's bad," she murmured. "But he's breathing. You did right, Mama. You held on." Tasha sank to the floor, her body trembling. Her voice came out thin, like something broken. "I got nothing left. They took everything." The woman crouched beside her, her touch steady. "Name's Martha Jackson," she said softly. "Child, you don't beg for kindness. You give it when you can, and when the time's right, it comes back to you." Tasha shook her head. "I gave all I had." Martha smiled gently, stirring the pot on the stove. "Then maybe it's time it comes back." She handed Tasha a bowl of hot soup, steam rising like hope reborn. "Eat, baby. Warm food helps the soul remember it's still alive." The word baby broke her. No one had called her that since her mother died. Tasha took a small sip, the heat sliding down her throat and spreading through her chest. The tears came then silent, unstoppable. Eli stirred on the couch, breathing easier. Martha covered him again, humming a slow gospel tune that wrapped around the room like a blanket. Tasha watched, her face wet, unable to speak. Martha touched her cheek gently. "You're not alone, baby," she said. "Not while I'm still breathing." For the first time in months, Tasha didn't feel invisible. The snow still fell outside, but it no longer felt cruel. Inside, the soup, the song, the simple warmth of another human heart, it was enough. That night, for the first time in months, someone called her baby, and she remembered what love felt like. 3 days later, the ground began to tremble. It started as a low hum, distant but growing, like thunder rolling over the frozen streets. Tasha stood by Martha's window, clutching a cup of tea, confused by the sound. Then she saw it, a river of headlights cutting through the snow. 1, 2, then hundreds, then more. Motorcycles. So many, she couldn't count. The roar grew until it filled the whole block, echoing against every wall. People poured out of their houses, staring in disbelief as the road filled with over 1,000 riders. The first to stop was Mike. His leather jacket was patched with the same emblem Eli had touched days before. Behind him was Danny, healed and grinning, his scarf whipping in the wind. Mike killed the engine, stepped off the bike, and walked toward Tasha. She couldn't move. He opened his arms wide, smiling through tears. "You opened your door when no one else would. Now we're opening the world for you." The roar of engines turned into cheers. Dozens of trucks followed, loaded with wood, paint, and tools. Men and women climbed out, ready to work. Some were bikers, some were strangers. All of them had heard about the woman who kept strangers alive through a storm. Mike handed her a folded blueprint. Mama Tasha's table, rebuilt, debt-free. Tasha covered her mouth, too stunned to speak. Eli clung to her coat, eyes wide. Martha stood behind them, her hands clasped, tears glinting in the sunlight. Cameras flashed as reporters arrived, shouting questions. But Tasha couldn't hear them. All she could hear was the sound of hammers striking wood, engines idling in rhythm, and people laughing. The smell of new lumber mixed with the scent of coffee and soup drifting from Martha's kitchen. Neighbors gathered at the sidewalk, the same ones who had turned her away. Some cried quietly. Others joined in, handing out food or holding boards in place. The sound of 1,000 engines became a hymn of redemption. Danny lifted Eli onto his shoulders so the boy could see. Mike turned to the crowd, raising his voice. "We don't fix walls, we fix hearts. And this one right here," he pointed to Tasha, "reminded us how." The moment hit her like a wave. Her knees buckled, but Mike caught her. She was laughing and crying at the same time, unable to believe any of it was real. Around her, people painted new signs, rewired lights, rebuilt windows. A banner stretched across the diner's front, Mama Tasha's table, where kindness feeds the soul. As the sun sank low, the engines revved again, sending ripples of sound through the air. The street glowed orange and gold. Martha came to stand beside her, resting a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I told you, child, kindness always finds its way back home." Tasha looked at the sea of people, the bikers, the workers, the children running through the snow, and finally let her tears fall. The world that had once turned its back on her was now rebuilding her piece by piece. For the first time in her life, the thunder outside didn't scare her. It sounded like hope. The smell of fresh paint still hung in the air. Danny was helping lift a new window frame into place, laughing with Mike as they worked. Martha stood nearby, holding a tray of lemonade for the workers. The sun caught Danny's face just right, and as he leaned forward, a lock of hair brushed aside, revealing a faint crescent-shaped scar behind his ear. Martha froze. Her hands trembled, and the tray slipped from her grasp, the glasses shattering on the ground. Danny turned at the sound, surprised. "You okay, Mum?" Martha didn't answer. Her eyes filled with tears as she stepped closer, her lips trembling. That scar. Lord, that little moon-shaped scar. "Where did you get it, son?" Danny looked confused, wiping the sweat from his neck. Had it since I was a kid. My mama said it came from when I fell off my bike. Martha's breath caught in her throat. Her knees went weak, and she reached out a shaking hand. She whispered so softly that only he could hear. Danny. Her voice cracked like dry wood breaking. Danny Jackson. The name hung in the air like a prayer. The young man blinked, stunned. He stared at her, searching her face, then slowly reached for the chain around his neck. From it hung a small, worn silver pendant, shaped like a heart, broken in half. He opened his palm and showed it to her. Martha gasped, covering her mouth. Around her own neck hung the missing half. She clutched it with trembling fingers, her tears falling freely. Danny's voice broke. "Mama?" He said it once, then again, louder, as if testing the word he had not spoken in decades. He dropped the tools and rushed to her. Martha caught him in her arms, her sobs deep and raw, shaking both their bodies. The work around them stopped. Hammers fell silent. The bikers, the neighbors, even the children stood still, watching as the two clung to each other. Some covered their mouths, others began to cry without understanding why. The noise of engines, wind, and the world itself seemed to fade until there was only the sound of a mother and her lost child finding each other again. Tasha stood beside Mike, her own eyes wet. She whispered, almost to herself, "I guess storms really do bring people home." Mike nodded, his voice low and steady. "Guess we all found our way home tonight." The light grew softer, golden and quiet. Martha cupped Danny's face, studying him through tears. 30 years of wandering ended in that single breath. Around them, snow began to fall again. Not harsh and cold this time, but light and slow, like a blessing from the sky. The sun was beginning to set when the black SUV returned, crawling down the newly paved road like a ghost from another life. But this time, there were no lawyers, no bodyguards, no folders, just Richard Hayes. He stepped out alone, the wind tugging at his coat as he stood before the rebuilt diner. Mama Tasha's table was alive again. Laughter spilled out through the open windows, the smell of cornbread and fried chicken filled the air, and people of every color and class sat together under the same roof. The sign gleamed in gold letters, "Where kindness feeds the soul." For a long moment, Richard simply stood there, watching. He looked like a man who had walked 1,000 miles in his own silence. The arrogance that once clung to him was gone. When Tasha saw him, she froze. The last time she'd looked into those eyes, they were empty. Now they carried something else, something heavy, almost human. He approached slowly, nodding at the volunteers hammering in the last boards. When he reached her, he stopped, leaving a respectful distance between them. "Miss Miller," he said softly, "I've been watching from a distance. I saw what you built here." He looked around, his voice breaking slightly. "I thought I knew what success was, but I see now. I was wrong." Tasha crossed her arms, her tone guarded but calm. "And what exactly do you think you see now, Mr. Hayes?" He drew in a long breath. "I saw my own reflection in your boy's eyes that day. The day I came to take this place away from you. For the first time in my life, I felt ashamed." He looked down at his hands, the way a man does when he's finally run out of excuses. "I spent years building towers that reached the sky, but somehow I never built a single thing that touched the ground." Tasha said nothing. The silence between them stretched like a wound being cleaned, painful but necessary. Richard reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document and a small set of keys. "This place is yours now," he said quietly. "The land, the building, all of it. No debt, no contracts, just yours. I want to help you run it properly, with staff, with funding, whatever you need." She didn't reach for the keys. Her voice stayed steady, though her eyes shimmered with emotion. "You can't buy forgiveness, Mr. Hayes." He nodded. "I know. I'm not trying to. I just want to build something good for once, something that might outlive my mistakes." His voice cracked, and for the first time, Tasha believed him. There was no performance, no pride, just a man stripped bare by truth. After a long pause, she finally took the folder. Her fingers brushed against his, and for a brief second, neither of them spoke. "Then build better," she said quietly. "Not for me, for the ones you still have time to save." He nodded again, his eyes glassy but calm. "I will." Then he turned and looked back at the people working around them, the bikers, the veterans, the children playing in the snow. "You did what I never could," he said softly. "You built a home out of nothing." Tasha watched him walk away, his figure small against the glowing sky. The light of sunset stretched across the street, bathing the diner in gold. The sign above the door shimmered, "Mama Tasha's Table, where kindness feeds the soul." She stood with Martha and Danny beside her, Eli at her side, tugging at her sleeve. "Mama," he whispered, pointing at the sign. "It's shining." Tasha smiled, brushing his hair back. "Maybe it always was, baby. We just needed to survive long enough to see it." As the engines of the road angels rumbled in the distance, the last rays of sunlight danced across the glass windows, reflecting warmth instead of pain. For the first time in years, Tasha felt peace not because the storm had ended, but because she had finally learned how to stand in it and still see light. 6 months later, the diner was never quiet. Mama Tasha's Table had become the heart of the neighborhood. The sound of laughter mixed with the clatter of plates and the low hum of conversation. On any given day, you could see construction workers, veterans, mothers, and children sitting side by side, sharing food and stories. The walls that had once felt like prison bars were now covered with photos of people who had passed through the storm and stayed. Martha sat by the window, sorting donation forms for the new veterans charity she and Danny had started. He moved easily through the room now, stronger than ever, hugging regulars, wiping tables, calling out orders. Sometimes Martha would just watch him, her eyes glistening with the quiet joy of a mother who had been given her son back by grace, not chance. Mike and the road angels had turned their rides into missions. Every weekend, they delivered food and blankets to the homeless. The sound of their engines, once feared, had become the rhythm of hope through the city. Richard Hayes came by once a month, quietly funding the Road Angels Foundation and volunteering without cameras or reporters. He no longer spoke like a man of business, but like someone still learning how to be kind. Tasha often stood behind the counter, her apron stained with flour, her smile calm. In her voiceover, she said she used to think she was saving strangers from a storm. But somewhere between the thunder and the silence, she realized they were the ones who saved her, not from the cold outside, but from the storm inside her heart. Eli ran between tables, laughing, his inhaler now just a reminder of the nights they survived. Outside, the evening sky glowed pink and gold. The rumble of motorcycles filled the air again, softer this time, like a familiar heartbeat. Tasha stepped outside and watched them ride past, the wind lifting her hair, her heart light. She whispered softly, "Sometimes angels don't have wings. They ride Harleys." From a freezing night when she opened her door to strangers, to a golden evening where kindness rebuilt her world, Tasha's life became proof that compassion can outlive any storm. What began as fear ended in forgiveness. A mother's courage healed not only her child, but an entire community and even the heart of the man who once broke hers. In her story, we are reminded that no act of kindness is ever wasted, and no soul is beyond redemption. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments and let me know what part moved you most. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Emotional Echoes so more hearts can feel stories like this one. Thanks for listening.